In the dawn of great civilizations, when oracles whispered in the ears of kings and shamans were literally the living libraries of the universe. The relationship between humans and plants was sacred, not as a trend, not as escapism with a medicinal excuse, but as a profound alchemy between body, consciousness, and nature. In that ancient world, cannabis was not a hyped plant. It was a portal, and every portal is double-edged. It can take you to the light or plunge you deep into the darkest corners of your own mind. And here arises the uncomfortable question that almost no one dares to ask. Seriously, what spiritual consequences does smoking marijuana have? Not from the voice of the government, nor from official science, nor from pop culture that sells it as a symbol of rebellion. Cool. Or do we look for answers where almost no one looks, in ancient traditions, between the lines of sacred texts, in the words of mystics who went beyond the smoke? This journey crosses continents and eras, from the ancient texts of India to Alexandrian Hermeticism, passing through Rastafarian rituals and the visions of ecstatic saints, not to condemn but to show what is usually hidden. Because this plant, trivialized, demonized, and romanticized at the same time, was for centuries a sacred key. And a key is not worshipped, it is used. The real question is, what doors does it open? In ancient India, the Atharva Veda names it as one of the 5 sacred plants of the earth, a divine gift, bearer of Amrita, the nectar of immortality. It's no coincidence that it is associated with Shiva, the god who destroys in order to recreate, the one who breaks illusion. His devotees, the sadhus, smoked it in clay chillums during extreme meditations, accompanied by fasting, mantras, and complete isolation. They weren't looking to get high, they were looking to disappear, to kill the ego, to break the identification with the body. There, cannabis wasn't an escape route, it was a head-on collision with oneself. In the East, Taoist masters, the Taoists, also considered it an ally for longevity and spiritual vision. Texts attributed to the alchemist Zhi Hong describe formulas with ginseng and other herbs that induce lucid dreams and expanded states of consciousness. But Taoism was clear. Every substance has qi, vital energy. If used well, it harmonizes. If used poorly, it does not. It amplifies internal disorder because cannabis doesn't create anything new, it only increases what's already there. And yes, like any amplifier in the hands of an out-of-tune instrument, the result is noise. In the Arab Muslim world, certain currents of medieval Sufism turned to hashish. For the Sufis, the ultimate goal was fana, the total dissolution of the self into the divine. There are accounts of ecstasy, visions, and encounters with the beloved. But even among them, Rumi made it clear with an uncomfortable phrase: why seek God in intoxication if he already dances sober within you? When the plant stopped being a bridge and became a crutch, it was abandoned in Jewish mysticism. The Kabbalah does not directly mention cannabis. Maybe because of context, maybe out of caution, but the message is the same. The Zohar warns that whoever forces open the doors of light without preparation ends up devoured by their own ignorance. Translated to the present, without inner work or action, any sacred substance becomes a toy for the ego. Even in the oldest Christian traditions, like the Essenes and certain Gnostic groups, archaeological studies suggest the use of resins with cannabinoids in anointing oils and in temple incense. Some researchers claim that the cane bosom of the Old Testament could have been cannabis. But again, it wasn't for recreation, it was for ritual, liturgy, access to prophetic states, never for escapism, never an empty custom. When it is used without sacredness, the plant stops being medicine and becomes something profane. In Africa and in America, shamanic traditions, from the Congo to the Amazon, share the same unwritten rule. Are power plants respected? Cannabis, when it appears, receives the same treatment as ayahuasca, mapacho, or peyote, because it's not the plant that heals but the spirit that inhabits it, and that spirit does not show itself. If there is no respect in Afro-American religions, like Candomblé or Umbanda, even though cannabis is not central, there is a key idea. Accès, vital energy, impersonal, alive. Every plant has its accès, its vibration, its function. Using it without understanding it is like beating a sacred drum blindly and then asking yourself, why did the wrong Orisha sum? Even among the Rastafaris, where ganja is considered the herb of wisdom, its use is not trivial. It is used in the reasoning centers. Gatherings for reflection, singing, prayer, and conscious silence. There, the herb is a sacrament, not entertainment. It is not smoked to kill time, it is smoked to look within oneself. And in all these traditions, the message is repeated. We, even though with different names, cannabis is potential, and potential is neutral. It can be a ladder or a fall, a tool or a crutch, an opening or a prison. The difference is not made by the plant, it's made by the person who uses it, their awareness, their intention, their preparation. As the Corpus Hermeticum teaches, the spirit does not reveal itself to those who knock on the door drunk with themselves. Those who seek the truth through shortcuts often discover that the shortcut was actually a circle. Maybe the real question isn't whether cannabis is sacred, but whether you are sacred enough to use it. Because every plant that opens portals also opens mirrors. And mirrors, even though we love them in pretty phrases, don't always reflect a pleasant image. Sometimes they show exactly what we've been avoiding for years. Cannabis, like many entheogenic substances, has that uncomfortable gift of dissolving masks. But not every soul is ready to see itself without filters. And that's where its true spiritual impact begins, not in elevation, but in the inevitable confrontation. Carl Jung called the shadow the set of repressed aspects of our psyche, not evil itself, but everything the ego refuses to accept. Fears, traumas, forbidden desires, inherited pains. Jung said that facing the shadow is the first step toward integration. Then the uncomfortable question arises. Isn't it curious that many people, when smoking marijuana, feel anxiety, paranoia, or a brutal sense of internal exposure? The plant doesn't create that, it just removes the varnish, and what appears is what was always there. For occult traditions, this is not surprising at all. Dion Fortune, in his studies on psychic defense, explains that altered states of consciousness, whether by rituals, substances, or trauma, weaken the etheric field, leaving the person more permeable. He warns that when consciousness is weakened, certain forces from lower planes can approach, feeding on open emotional cracks. It's not superstition, it's deep psychic dynamics. When the conscious mind withdraws due to sleep, meditation, or cannabis, the unconscious takes control, and if that unconscious is full of unresolved wounds, those wounds, they're going to speak, and not always in a gentle voice. What many call a bad trip is often actually the spirit trying to do a general cleansing. Raja Yoga recognizes this without hesitation. In the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, it is mentioned that certain powers or siddhis can arise from herbs, but something key is warned. Without discernment and ethics, those states are illusory. They shine, seduce, and distract. The Yoga Sutras go even further and warn about something key. The siddhis can become obstacles to samadhi, real enlightenment. Why? Because they feed the spiritual ego, which is much more dangerous than the common ego. The normal ego wants likes, the spiritual one wants to feel chosen, and that trap is very subtle. Osho said it bluntly in his talks about drugs and consciousness. Substances open doors that only silence should open. Yes, they are shortcuts, but unstable ones. And those who enter without a map or guide usually leave through the same door convinced they've gotten somewhere. On the energetic level, cannabis acts directly on the subtle body. Practitioners of Reiki, Kundalini, yoga, or ceremonial magic report increased auric sensitivity after using it. That can be positive if the person is centered, otherwise they become a beacon without a captain, emitting light but without direction. And light, let's not fool ourselves. It doesn't just attract moths, it also attracts energetic predators. Some Amazonian shamans sum it up like this: every plant that opens also tests. And the test is not mystical, it's moral. What will you do with what you see? Will you run away, intellectualize it, or will you act? It's no coincidence that many chronic users describe a constant feeling of stagnation. The body relaxes, but the soul stays on pause. Creativity seems to flow, but it rarely materializes. Even spirituality feels deep, but it doesn't transform. That's it. The Kabbalists call it klipot, energetic shells, layers formed by poorly integrated spiritual experiences, intense experiences that aren't digested and accumulate like dust in the inner field. They create the illusion of progress without real progress. And here the greatest danger appears, confusing feeling a lot with evolving, because not all expansion is elevation. Expansion without direction is swelling, and all swelling bursts sooner or later. At that point, cannabis used unconsciously stops being a sacred plant and becomes the plant of stagnation. It's not about what it is, but how it's used. It doesn't create spiritual passivity, but it's the perfect setting for someone who already has it inside. Some people say, I feel peace, so it works. But the peace induced by an external agent is like the silence of a sealed room. Pleasant, yes, but artificial. Real peace appears even in the midst of chaos, because it is born from the core, not from stimulation. If cannabis gives you peace, the question isn't whether it calms you, but whether it teaches you to generate that peace by yourself or just rents it to you for a while. The true encounter with the divine almost always begins with the encounter with the shadow, and that moment is not pretty. There are no rainbows, there's no sepia filter. There's shame, anger, sadness, confusion. But if you stay there breathing without running away, something changes. You don't get a spectacular vision, something more uncomfortable and more real comes. Integration, accepting what is, and from there, only then, you can do what could become. In this sense, cannabis is like a water mirror. It can reflect the sky, but if you jump in carelessly, you'll only find mud. The human spirit does not walk alone. The inner journey, no matter how lonely it may seem, is always an echo of the collective network to which we belong. No spiritual practice, no power plant, no enlightenment is completely individual. Everything we touch transforms us, and everything that culture accepts or rejects shapes how we touch ourselves. Cannabis is the perfect example, a plant with deep mystical roots now turned into a global commodity, pop icon, political flag, and symbol of youthful rebellion. But long before legalization or persecution, it was already part of the sacred, and in some places it still is. In the Rastafarian tradition, for example, ganja is not an addiction, man, it's a vow, a pact with the divine. The Rastafari movement, born in 1930s Jamaica as a resistance to colonialism, was not just political, it was spiritual. It mixed African roots, biblical readings, and a completely different worldview. The Rastas. The herb is the healing of the nations, as it says in Revelation. Smoking it is a sacrament, a way to get closer to the living God. There is no banality in that act. There is reverence. The reasoning sessions, where the herb is shared while people reflect, sing, and contemplate, are not casual gatherings. They are living liturgy. Silence, listening, words, and smoke move forward together. The community is the cathedral, and the plant is the incense of the spirit. And it's not something exclusive to the Rastafarians. On the African continent, especially in Bantu traditions, there are records of the ritual use of cannabis in celebrations, funerals, and rites. By the way, it wasn't used to numb the pain, but to go through it. It wasn't about escape, it was about presence. It wasn't about isolation, it was about invoking the ancestors. In pre-Columbian America, although cannabis was not native, the principle was the same. Psychoactive plants were used within well-defined collective rituals. There might have been portals, yes, but they were supported by cosmology, myths, chants, priests. There was a symbolic structure that contained the experience. Outside of that framework, the plant lost its sacred character and was reduced to mere stimulation. And that's exactly what modernity did. It took the plant out of the temple and threw it onto the shelf of the cultural supermarket. It turned it into a product, into aesthetics, into a meme. What was once a sacrament became marketing. What was once a spiritual vehicle ended up as a registered trademark. But there are people who smoke to escape and people who listen to wake up. If you feel that internal tension, I want to change but don't know how to start. The psychedelic culture of the 60s tried to recover that ritual sense, but it did so without roots, without lineage, without initiation. Alan Watts, Timothy Leary, cannabis, lysergic acid diethylamide, and politics, all mixed in the same pot. There was a genuine search for transcendence, of course, but it was fragmented. Aldous Huxley had already warned about it in The Doors of Perception. The visionary experience can show, but it doesn't educate. It reveals, but it doesn't structure. The risk lies in confusing a glimpse with a dwelling. The West, by discrediting tradition, created a dangerous void. Spirituality without ritual, experience without ethics, ecstasy without integration, intuition without action. In that context, cannabis became a symbol of counterculture, of rebellion, of freedom, but almost never of spiritual responsibility. That's why, in the traditions where it remains sacred, its use is collective. The group serves as a container, compass, and witness in many Afro-Amerindian rituals. No one consumes the plant. There are only songs, instruments, cycles, cleansings. There are limits. The collective holds the sacred. The individual dissolves in order to be reborn. And now we return to the center of it all. Cannabis has a cultural soul. It carries all the narratives that surround it. When it is used in the temple, it acts as a sacrament. When it is smoked alone in a room filled with anxiety, it usually amplifies the disconnection. It is as malleable as water, taking the shape of its container, and the container of modern culture is fast, superficial, ironic, and cynical. The herb that once invoked gods is now a topic for Netflix series. The hemp of knowledge became an advertising slogan, a stand-up joke, rebellion with branding. Even so, there is resistance in indigenous communities that reject spiritual extractivism, in young seekers who reclaim fasting, the song, the ritual, in silent teachers who, even in the midst of urban noise, teach how to smoke as a form of prayer. The plant remains the same. What changes is the context. What changes is the intention. What changes is the symbolic field that supports the experience. And perhaps that is its deepest lesson. Spirituality is not an individual feeling. It's a collective frequency. It's not what you feel, it's what you generate. It's not what you see under the effect. It's who you become when the effect is gone. As an old African proverb says, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far in a circle, bring the drum, bring the fire, bring the plant. Because true spirituality is not measured by the altered states you reach, but by the elevated states you are able to sustain. However, if you made it this far, leave this comment: I am willing to see myself without masks. It's not just any comment, it's a commitment to yourself. And if you write it, it's because you know you've already crossed an internal line that has no turning back. The path isn't revealed by the lights you see, but by what you do with the shadow those lights cast. Between clarity and fog, there's a very fine line, and it's called discernment. Cannabis, like any power plant, promises nothing. It offers possibilities, and those possibilities can awaken or numb, enlighten, or confuse. There, the seeker faces the real crossroads. Do you want to expand your consciousness or escape from it? Osho, so often misunderstood as a hedonist, put it with surgical precision. Anything can become meditation if there is presence, and anything can turn into a drug if there is absence. The problem is never the plant. It's the consciousness that accompanies it. When presence is lacking or the path turns into a carousel, that's why ancient cultures surrounded sacred plants with rituals, fasting, songs, silence, preparation, and guidance. It wasn't superstition, it was energetic hygiene. Did they know something we've forgotten? A portal isn't a tourist destination, it's a crossing point, and not every soul is ready for what's there. On the other side, discernment, phronesis. For the Greeks, Viveka and Vedanta is the invisible blade that separates the real from the merely sensory. It is the third eye, not as a power, but as a compass. Without that compass, what seems like enlightenment can be hypersensitivity. What seems like simple vision, a mental echo. What seems like intuition, a disguised desire. There is an intoxication that feels like clarity. It comes with brilliant ideas, synesthesia, synchronicities. Everything seems profound. But if none of that transforms your relationship with others, with the world, or with your own shadow, it's just spiritual fireworks, beautiful, intense, and empty. The real path is drier. It demands consistency, presence without spectacle, silence without internal noise. That's why, when used outside of a structured path, cannabis can create an addiction that's subtler than chemical ones. The addiction to the feeling of spirituality without the practice of spirituality, it's easy to feel deep under its effect. It's much harder to be that way in traffic, in an endless line, or in a conflict with someone who hurts you. Enlightenment is not measured by what you see with your eyes closed, but by what you do with your eyes open, with your feet covered in dirt. When discernment is lacking, cannabis can create a foggy mirror where the ego believes it is awake, when in reality it is only dozing among sensations. A vegetative peace that paralyzes more than it pacifies. In traditional occultism, there is talk of the false light of Yod, an apparent clarity that does not come from integration, but from mental saturation. Rootless brilliance. Cannabis used without wisdom can feed that illusion of progress while everything spins in ever more colorful circles. That's why, spiritually speaking, the plant only makes sense when the inner soil is clean. When there is clear intention, when there is silence before the puff and an even deeper silence afterwards. When there is guidance, tradition, method, humility, and above all, when you are willing to receive not just the sensation. As a Sufi master once said, God is a mirror that does not mock your gestures. It simply reflects them with total honesty. Does cannabis have spiritual potential? Yes, but all potential requires context, discipline, intention, and understanding. Stripped of its ritual function and turned into a cultural product, it runs the risk of becoming just another sophisticated distraction. Authentic spiritual seeking is a delicate art. It's not about escaping, but about staying. It's not about seeing lights, but about becoming light. Ask yourself honestly, what are you looking for when you light that joint? peace, space, silence. If you can't find that within yourself, maybe the plant only offers you a mirror. And mirrors, no matter how beautiful they are, only show what's already there. The true journey continues beyond the smoke, beyond the fog. The question is simple: will you walk it with your eyes open?